seals, the seal judgments, are really somewhat passive. We've seen this kind of anarchy that is described here in this verse, spreading across Europe. Here's a picture of anarchy in Greece. But here's the key to understanding the seals in the book of Revelation, and that is this. It is the gradual withdrawal of God's common grace. The gradual withdrawal of God's common grace. Common grace may be a phrase that you're not familiar with. So here's the definition by a man named Wayne Grudem, who is a great theologian of our time. He says this: common grace is the grace of God by which he gives people innumerable blessings that are not part of salvation. Common grace. The kind of life that we all live and that we like and somehow think that we deserve. Here's a verse that would describe common grace from Psalms. The Lord is good to all. He has compassion on all he has made. The eyes of all look to you, and you give them their food at the proper time. You open your hand and satisfy the desires of every living thing. It is the nature of God to be gracious. And even though we live in a world that has been destroyed and ruined by sin, God is still gracious to hold many of those effects in abeyance and allow us to live lives that are really pretty nice. Here's a picture of common grace. Doesn't that look like a kid is having a good time? You know, the sun is shining, his belly is really full, you know, he's got the shades there and he's cool. That's common grace. That life is good. We think we deserve it. We think we deserve lives that are full of love and relative safety. When I grew up in the town I grew up in, we never locked our doors, even when we went away on vacation. Came home and walked right in the house. Of course, all the furniture was gone, but we walked right in. No, it was just a safe place to live, and we expect that. We expect to be able to have food and drink. We expect great weather, especially in a place like San Diego. But then things happen in our world that cause us to wonder, what happened to all the good stuff? You know, Challenger blows up and people die. And there's terrible weather anomalies. We think they're anomalies. Tornadoes and terrible, I think that was probably a Photoshop picture. We see things like the destruction of Pompeii. I read about Pompeii. They had 6,000 people living in that town and 60 brothels. It was maybe a place that got a little bit of a judgment there. We see a terrible tsunami destroy parts of Indonesia. We see gigantic hurricanes like Andrew here bearing down on Florida. And we say, what's going on here? Why are all these bad things happening? We see people in trouble. We think we're in trouble here in the United States because of our recession. But in many places in the world, they are rioting because of the lack of food. We see all kinds of financial crisis that's taken place. These things that happen to us, and we say, why are these things happening? Because God's common grace is not complete, in the sense that God holds back the very worst that could happen. If he just let his judgment fall on the world as we deserve because of sin, we would have been wiped out thousands of years ago. And yet God allows us to continue to live, allows us to enjoy life. And then there's these little cracks in common grace that he gives us to make us think, maybe this life isn't all there is. Maybe there's a reason why these bad things happen to us. But why are the seals of Revelation any different than just normal life, where most of the time it's good, but sometimes bad things happen? Here's the reason: that the events here described in chapter 6 are universal in nature or in scope. They happen to the entire world. People are dying all over the world. People are experiencing famine all over the world. The numbers that die during this time are huge. It says here in verse 8 that they were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague. Of 1 in 4 people die during this time. 1 in 4. And we think, well, 1 in 4, how big is that? Well, here's the death rate right now. Every year, 1 in every 113. That's the death rate. And so the whole world then will recognize that during this time of terrible death and destruction and anarchy and plague and all these things, that God has come. Look at what they say in verse 17 of chapter 6. Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and every slave and every free man hid in caves and among the rocks of the mountains. They called to the mountains and the rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand?" And you know what I would say to these guys? You haven't seen anything yet. You're experiencing what life would normally be like if it weren't for the common grace, the kindness, and the mercy of God. Undeserved, as grace is defined as being. Undeserved. And yet we think we deserve it, and when God takes it away, the world is going to be like it should have been, and would normally be under sin if God was not gracious to give us all these good things. So, in addition, the size and universality of the seals set the stage for the solution that is going to be offered by the Antichrist. Here's what's going on. People will be overwhelmed with these changes. Suddenly, can you imagine if 1 in 4 people died? What would we do with all of those bodies? I mean, if 1 in 113, we bury them, but 1 in 4, they're going to be stacked up. We're not going to be knowing what to do with them. There's going to be tremendous changes, and there's going to be great fear that sweeps over the earth. How can we stay alive? That will be people's number one desire, to stay alive. How can we survive? And into that gap, into that vacuum of fear will come the Antichrist with all the solutions that people will grab onto because they're afraid. And he will lie, and he will promise things that he cannot deliver, and people will believe him because the only alternative is to throw themselves on the mercy of God. And that is something that we are predisposed not to be willing to do.